2 years ago, my husband Jim staged his own death to escape our marriage. Tonight, at his secret wedding to another woman, I'm about to make his fake death very real by destroying the identity he built on lies. "You look surprised to see me," I whispered, stepping into the candlelit chapel where he was kissing his new bride. "Considering you buried me alive with your betrayal." The screams that followed were worth every agonizing month I spent becoming someone he'd never recognize. But let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because the woman standing in that chapel doorway was nothing like the trusting wife, who once believed her husband had perished in a hiking accident in the Colorado Rockies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Erica Martinez, and until 24 months ago, I thought I was living a fairy tale. Picture this: a sprawling ranch house in Aspen, surrounded by snow-capped mountains that looked like a postcard every morning when I opened our bedroom curtains. Jim Blackwood and I had been married for 6 years, together for 8. He was a successful financial advisor who specialized in helping wealthy clients disappear their assets for tax purposes. The irony wasn't lost on me later. He'd been practicing for his own disappearance all along. Our life looked perfect from the outside. Weekend ski trips, charity galas where Jim would charm donors with his devastating smile and quick wit, dinner parties where I played the supportive wife in designer dresses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I had my own career as a freelance graphic designer, working with high-end clients who appreciated my eye for detail and my ability to create identities for luxury brands. Again, the irony would become crystal clear later. I was an expert at crafting false images, yet I never saw through my husband's masterpiece of deception. The cracks started showing 6 months before his death. Jim became distant, claiming increased pressure from demanding clients who needed round-the-clock attention for their offshore investments. He'd disappear for days at a time, supposedly meeting with these mysterious clients in cities I'd never heard him mention before. Places like Belize City, Nassau, and Panama City. When he returned, he'd be exhausted but oddly energized, like someone who'd just completed an intense workout. "These clients are paranoid about digital communication," he'd explain when I asked why he never called during these trips. "Everything has to be done in person, with complete privacy." I believed him because trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. The changes weren't just professional. Jim started working out obsessively, transforming his previously soft frame into something lean and muscular. He claimed it was stress relief, but he'd never shown interest in fitness before. He also became secretive about his phone, taking calls in other rooms and keeping his device face down during dinner. When I commented on these changes, he'd deflect with gifts, expensive jewelry, surprise weekend trips to San Francisco, tickets to shows I'd mentioned wanting to see. "You're imagining things, Erica," he'd say with that charming smile that had first attracted me at a coffee shop in Denver 8 years earlier. "I'm just working hard to secure our future. Don't you want financial security?" Of course I did. I wanted the life we'd planned together. Children, maybe a vacation home in Tuscany, early retirement so we could travel the world. Jim's increasing wealth was supposed to make those dreams possible. The night before everything changed, we had dinner at our favorite restaurant in downtown Aspen, Vin Blanc, an intimate French bistro where we'd celebrated every anniversary. Jim seemed nervous, fidgeting with his wedding ring and barely touching his usual favorite, the duck confit. I thought he was planning to surprise me, maybe with news about the baby we'd been trying for, or perhaps he'd finally saved enough for that house in Tuscany. "I love you, Erica," he said suddenly, reaching across the table to take my hand. His fingers were cold despite the warm restaurant. "Whatever happens, I need you to know that everything I've done has been to protect you." I laughed, thinking he was being dramatic about some work stress. Protect me from what? Your obsession with checking your phone during romantic dinners? He didn't smile. Instead, He stared at me with an intensity I'd never seen before, as if he was trying to memorize my face. "Promise me something," he said. "If anything ever happens to me, don't dig too deep into my business affairs. Just live your life. Move on, be happy." The request seemed ridiculous. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Jim. You're being paranoid." But something was going to happen. Something that would shatter every assumption I'd made about my life, my marriage, and the man. I thought I knew better than anyone. The call came at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. Jim had supposedly left for an early hiking trip to Maroon Bells, a challenging trail he'd never shown interest in before. The voice on the phone belonged to Deputy Martinez from the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office. No relation, despite the shared surname that would later become one of many coincidences I'd learned to question. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm sorry to inform you that your husband's vehicle was found abandoned at the Maroon Bells trailhead. We've initiated a search and rescue operation, but the weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. A spring blizzard had moved in overnight, dumping 3 feet of snow and creating avalanche conditions that made the search nearly impossible. For 3 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. Search teams combed the mountains when weather permitted. I posted flyers, gave interviews to local news stations, and coordinated with volunteer searchers who donated their time to help find my missing husband. The entire community rallied around me, bringing casseroles, offering support, treating me like a grieving widow even though we hadn't found a body. Jim's business partner, Dexter Kane, handled the legal aspects of declaring Jim dead and managing his client accounts. "He talked about you constantly," Dexter told me during one of our meetings at the plush offices of Blackwood Financial. "You were everything to him, Erica. He'd want you to be taken care of." The life insurance payout was substantial, $2 million, enough to maintain our lifestyle indefinitely. But here's the thing about grief. It makes you notice details you might otherwise overlook. Like how Jim's hiking boots were still in our closet, even though he'd supposedly worn them on his final trek. Like how his passport was missing from the safe where we kept all our important documents. Like how the emergency credit card I didn't know existed had been used 3 times in the month before his disappearance, all at businesses I'd never heard of. The woman who would eventually walk into that chapel to confront the man who'd destroyed her life was born in those moments of dawning suspicion, in the space between public grief and private doubt. 3 months after Jim's disappearance was officially classified as a presumed death, I should have been moving forward. The grief counselor I'd been seeing twice a week, Dr. Sarah Chen, kept encouraging me to embrace the healing process and honor Jim's memory by living fully. The support group for widows met every Thursday at the community center, where women shared stories of learning to sleep alone and managing finances independently. But I wasn't healing. I was investigating. It started innocently enough. I was going through Jim's personal belongings, deciding what to donate and what to keep, when I found a second phone charger in his gym bag. Jim had always been obsessive about organization. 1 charger for the office, 1 for home, 1 for travel. Why would he need a 4th? I tore through every pocket, every compartment, but found no corresponding device. That's when I called my best friend, Detective Bree Sullivan from the Denver Police Department. We'd been roommates in college before she joined the force, and I discovered my talent for visual design. Bree had always been the practical one, the person who questioned everything while I saw the best in people. She'd been suspicious of Jim from the beginning, though she'd kept her concerns to herself during our marriage. "You found a charger for a phone that doesn't exist," she said, examining the device when she drove up to Aspen that weekend. "Standard, burner phone charger, the kind people use when they don't want calls traced back to them." Her detective instincts were immediately engaged, and I could see her mentally filing away details. "Erica, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Did Jim ever do anything that seemed off?" I told her about the mysterious business trips, the missing passport, the emergency credit card. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bree listened, without judgment, occasionally jotting notes in the small notebook she always carried. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains that had supposedly claimed my husband. "There's something else," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "The day before he disappeared, Jim cleaned out our joint savings account, transferred everything to an account I'd never seen before. When I asked Dexter about it, he said it was a temporary move for a large investment that required liquid assets." Bree's expression darkened. "How much money are we talking about?" $800,000. "And this investment?" Dexter said it fell through after Jim died, but the money was tied up in legal complications. He's been handling everything. Says it might take years to recover the funds. Bree set down her notebook and took my hands in hers. "Erica, I've worked financial crimes for 3 years. What you're describing isn't investment protocol. It's preparation for disappearance." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though part of me had been thinking the same thing for weeks. "You think he's alive?" It wasn't a question. I think someone with Jim's expertise in moving money for wealthy clients would know exactly how to vanish without a trace. The question is why he'd want to leave you. Bree's directness was one of the things I'd always loved about her, but in that moment, it felt cruel. "What aren't you telling me about your marriage?" The question forced me to examine memories I'd been avoiding. The late-night phone calls Jim claimed were work emergencies. The weekend conferences that never appeared on any professional calendar I could find. The gradual decrease in physical intimacy over the past year, which I'd attributed to work stress. The way he'd started looking at me sometimes, as if I were a stranger he was trying to place. He'd been different, I finally admitted. Distant, like he was planning something but couldn't tell me what. I described the conversation at Ven Blanc, how he'd seemed to be saying goodbye without actually saying the words. He told me not to dig into his business affairs if anything happened to him. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. "Or he was giving you instructions," Bree said grimly. "Erica, I need you to understand something. If Jim is alive, if he staged his own death, then everything about your marriage was a lie. Men don't disappear from loving, secure relationships. They disappear when they're hiding something or running from something." That night, after Bree returned to Denver, I sat in our bedroom, my bedroom now, and really looked at the space for the first time since Jim's disappearance. I'd been so focused on preserving everything exactly as he'd left it that I hadn't noticed what was missing. His expensive watch collection was gone, except for one older piece he'd never particularly liked. The leather portfolio where he kept important documents was empty except for outdated insurance papers. Most tellingly, the antique coin collection he'd inherited from his grandfather, worth nearly $50,000, had vanished. But he'd left behind things that would have been impossible to replace. Family photos, his college diploma, sentimental items from our early relationship. It was as if he'd carefully selected what to take and what to leave behind to maintain the illusion of an interrupted life rather than a planned departure. I started a journal that night, documenting every inconsistency, every question that didn't have a satisfactory answer. The journal became my obsession, filled with timelines, phone records I'd obtained from our carrier, credit card statements that revealed purchases I couldn't explain. I learned that grief makes you desperate for answers, but betrayal makes you methodical in finding them. The breakthrough came 6 weeks later when I was organizing Jim's office. Hidden behind a family photo was a business card for a private investigator in Miami named Gil Rodriguez. When I called the number, a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Rodriguez Investigations." "I found your card among my deceased husband's belongings," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm wondering if you might have worked with him." The pause that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. I know because I was counting my heartbeats, which had accelerated to a dangerous pace. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to be more specific about who your husband was and what kind of work he might have needed. Jim Blackwood, financial advisor from Aspen. He disappeared 2 months ago during a hiking trip. Another pause, shorter. This time, Mrs. Blackwood, I think we should meet in person. Flying to Miami felt like stepping into another world. I'd told everyone I needed a change of scenery, a brief vacation to process my grief. Only Bree knew the real reason for my trip, and she'd insisted on running background checks on Gil Rodriguez before I boarded the plane. Clean record, she'd reported. 20 years with Miami-Dade police, specializes in missing persons and insurance fraud. If your husband hired him, it wasn't for anything legal. Rodriguez's office was located in a strip mall between a Cuban bakery and a cell phone repair shop. The building's faded paint and cracked parking lot suggested either humility or hard times. When I knocked on the frosted glass door marked Rodriguez Investigations, a weathered man in his 50s opened it immediately, as if he'd been watching for my arrival. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, extending a calloused hand. Thank you for making the trip. We have a lot to discuss. His office was Spartan but organized. Metal filing cabinets, a computer that looked like it survived the previous decade, and walls covered with certificates and commendations from his police days. A single family photo on his desk showed him with a woman and 2 teenagers, all wearing matching Miami Dolphins jerseys. Your husband contacted me 8 months ago, Rodriguez began without preamble, pulling a thick file from his desk drawer. He said he needed help with what he called a delicate personal matter. People in my line of work, we hear that phrase a lot. Usually means someone's cheating or planning to disappear. He opened the file, revealing photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. In Jim's case, it was both. The photos hit me like physical blows. Jim with a woman I'd never seen before, brunette and petite, maybe 25 years old. They were holding hands outside a restaurant in Key West, kissing on a boat dock, shopping, together in what looked like an upscale neighborhood. The timestamps showed the photos were taken over several months, during periods when Jim had claimed to be meeting with clients. Her name is Layla Voss, Rodriguez continued, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone delivering life-destroying information. Works as a yoga instructor, originally from Oregon. They met at a wellness retreat in Costa Rica that your husband attended last year. You know about that trip? I shook my head, feeling nauseous. Jim had never mentioned Costa Rica. He said he was in Panama City for work. Panama City, Panama, not Florida. The retreat was called New Beginnings. Ironic, considering what he was planning. Rodriguez spread out more documents. He hired me to investigate Layla's background, make sure she wasn't running any scams of her own, wanted to be certain she was genuine before he committed to his plan. What plan? I whispered, though part of me already knew. Faking his death to start over with her. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. Your husband was thorough, Mrs. Blackwood. He'd been planning this for over a year. The hiking trip, the blizzard timing, even the location. He researched everything. Did you know Maroon Bells has 17 documented cases of hikers disappearing without a trace? Bodies never recovered due to avalanche patterns and wildlife. The room seemed to tilt around me. But the search teams, the community support, the grief counseling, he watched me suffer through all of that. He was already in Key West by the fee. Time the search began, Rodriguez said, sliding another photo across the desk. This one showed Jim with a deep tan and significantly longer hair, barely recognizable as the man I'd married. New identity documents, new social security number, the works. Goes by the name David Winters now. David Winters. The name felt like acid in my mouth. How is that possible? How does someone just become someone else? Your husband had connections, Mrs. Blackwood. In his line of work, helping wealthy clients hide assets, He'd met people who specialize in making identities, disappear and new ones appear. Cost him about $200,000, but he had that from liquidating assets you probably didn't even know existed. Rodriguez pulled out a manila envelope and hesitated before opening it. There's more, and it's going to hurt. Your husband didn't just want to disappear. He wanted to make sure you couldn't follow him or cause problems for his new life. Inside the envelope were legal documents, all bearing Jim's forged signature. Divorce papers that had never been filed, claiming irreconcilable differences and citing my alleged emotional instability. A restraining order application describing me as increasingly erratic and threatening. Character references from people I'd never heard of, all testifying to my supposedly deteriorating mental state. He was building a case against you, Rodriguez explained. Insurance fraud investigators would eventually start asking questions about the payout. If they did, Jim wanted documentation showing you were an unstable wife who might have staged his disappearance yourself for the money. You'd be the prime suspect, not him. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't speak. Jim hadn't just left me. He'd planned to destroy me if I ever got close to the truth. Every loving gesture in our final months together had been manipulation. Every kiss had been a lie. Why are you telling me this? I finally managed. If Jim paid you to help him disappear, why are you exposing him? Rodriguez's expression hardened. Because he stiffed me on the final payment. And because I've got daughters, Mrs. Blackwood. What your husband did to you. What he was planning to do. It's not right. No woman deserves that level of betrayal. He handed me a business card with an address written on the back. That's where they're living now. Key West, in a house overlooking the water. They're planning to get married next month. I've got the chapel reservation and the photographer's contract. Your husband's been telling people his first wife died tragically in a hiking accident. Real tearjerker story. I stared at the address, my hands trembling. What am I supposed to do with this information? That's up to you, Rodriguez said. But if it were my wife who'd been betrayed like this, I'd want her to have choices. Right now, you're still legally married to a dead man. Layla thinks she's marrying a grieving widower. The Key West community believes David Winters is a tragic romantic figure starting over after loss. He leaned forward, his weathered face serious. You could expose him, Mrs. Blackwood. Blow up his whole new life just like he tried to blow up yours. Question is, are you brave enough to become someone he'd never expect you to be? I spent 3 sleepless nights in my Miami hotel room, staring at the address Rodriguez had given me. The rational part of my mind said to call the authorities, expose Jim's fraud, and let the legal system handle justice. But there was another voice, one that had been growing stronger since I'd seen those photos of him with Layla, a voice that whispered about a different kind of justice. On the 4th morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I rented a car and drove to Key West. The house was exactly as Rodriguez had described. A pristine white cottage with blue shutters, overlooking the turquoise waters of the Gulf. Palm trees swayed in the ocean breeze, and bougainvillea cascaded over a white picket fence that belonged in a postcard. It was the kind of place Jim and I had talked about retiring to someday, back when I believed we shared the same dreams. I parked across the street and waited. At 9:30 a.m., the front door opened, and there he was, my dead husband, very much alive. The deep tan Rodriguez had mentioned made him look healthy and relaxed. His hair was longer, bleached lighter by the sun, and he'd grown a beard that changed his face dramatically. But it was undeniably Jim Blackwood, now calling himself David Winters. He was loading beach chairs and a cooler into a Jeep when she appeared. Layla was even more beautiful in person than in the photographs, petite and graceful, with long dark hair and the kind of effortless elegance that suggested yoga retreats and organic smoothies. She wrapped her arms around Jim's waist and kissed his neck while he loaded their beach gear. The casual intimacy of the gesture hit me like a physical blow. They drove away together, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I sat in my rental car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the life my husband had chosen over our marriage disappear down the street. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. I walked around the neighborhood, noting details. The mailbox read D. Winters in neat script. There was a yoga studio 3 blocks away called Serenity Flow, probably where Layla worked. The local coffee shop had a bulletin board covered with wedding announcements, and I spotted one for David Winters and Layla Voss, scheduled for the following month at the historic Key West Lighthouse. That evening, I positioned myself at a waterfront restaurant where I could see their house. Sure enough, they returned at sunset, sandy and sun-kissed from their beach day. Through the large windows of their cottage, I watched them move around each other with the comfortable choreography of people deeply in love. Jim was cooking dinner while Layla set the table, pausing occasionally to kiss him or steal a piece of whatever he was preparing. It was the life I thought we'd had. The life I'd believed was real. My phone buzzed with a text from Bree. "Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, then at the glowing windows of the cottage across the water. How could I explain that I was watching my dead husband live a fairy tale with another woman? That everything I'd grieved for had been a carefully constructed lie? Instead, I typed back, "Fine, just processing. We'll call tomorrow." But I wasn't. Fine. I was transforming into someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of thoughts I'd never entertained before. Sitting in that restaurant, watching Jim laugh at something Layla said, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest where my heart used to be. The next morning, I drove to the Serenity Flow yoga studio. Through the window, I could see Layla leading a morning class, her voice carrying as she guided students through poses. She looked serene, genuinely happy, completely unaware that her fiancé was a fraud who'd abandoned a wife to build this new life with her. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. A woman emerging from the class stopped to chat with friends outside the studio. I overheard her saying, "Layla's been glowing ever since she got engaged. David seems like such a catch, successful businessman starting over after losing his wife so tragically. It's like a romance novel." The woman's words crystallized something that had been building since Rodriguez showed me those first photos. Jim hadn't just betrayed me. He'd turned my supposed death into a romantic story that made him more attractive to his new life. My tragic demise was part of his charm, the wounded widower narrative that made women want to heal him. I returned to my hotel and opened my laptop. For the first time since arriving in Key West, I had a clear sense of purpose. If Jim wanted to use my death as the foundation for his new identity, then I would give him a death story he'd never forget. I started researching everything about David Winters' new life. Social media accounts, business registrations, utility bills, all the digital breadcrumbs that create a modern identity. Jim had been thorough in creating his new persona, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was too naive to fight back. That night, I called Bree from my hotel room. When she answered, I could hear the concern in her voice. "Erica, where are you really? You sound different." "I found him, Bree. Jim's alive, and he's getting married next month." I told her everything. Rodriguez, the photos, the Key West cottage, Layla. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Jesus Christ," she finally said. "What are you going to do?" I looked out my hotel window toward the lights of Key West, where my husband was probably falling asleep next to the woman he'd chosen over me. "I'm going to destroy David Winters," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "And then, I'm going to let Jim Blackwood rise from the dead." "Erica, you're talking about revenge, not justice," Bree said, her detective instincts kicking in. "What you're describing could land you in prison. Fraud, identity theft, harassment. The list goes on. And what Jim did to me, what's that called?" I could hear the ice in my own voice, a coldness I'd never possessed before. "He stole $2 million in life insurance. He's about to commit bigamy. He destroyed my entire existence so thoroughly that I spent months questioning my own sanity. Then, "Let me handle this through proper channels," Bree pleaded. "I can contact the Florida authorities, get them to investigate. We can build a case that takes years while he lives happily ever after?" I cut her off. "No. By the time the legal system moves, he'll have disappeared again. You said it yourself. Someone with his expertise knows how to vanish, without a trace." There was a long pause. When Bree spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled, the way she talked to suspects she was trying not to spook. "What exactly are you planning to do?" I stared out at the Key West harbor, watching boats bob in the moonlight. "I'm going to become someone he never thought I could be, someone who fights back. Erica, he left me for dead, Bree, literally. In his mind, I'm already gone. Well, maybe it's time I acted like it." I hung up before she could argue further. My phone immediately started ringing again, but I turned it off. For the first time in months, I felt completely alone and strangely liberated by that solitude. The next morning, I walked into a salon in downtown Key West. The stylist, a woman named Carmen with vibrant purple hair and multiple piercings, looked at my shoulder-length brown hair with professional assessment. "I want something completely different," I told her, handing her a photo I'd printed from my hotel computer. "Blonde, short, nothing like what I have now." Carmen studied the image. A pixie cut that would transform my entire face. "You sure about this? This is a pretty dramatic change." "That's exactly what I want. Dramatic change." 3 hours later, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The short blonde hair made my eyes look larger, my cheekbones more pronounced. Combined with a different style of makeup I'd learned from YouTube tutorials during my sleepless nights, I looked like someone's younger sister, familiar but fundamentally different. Next stop was a boutique where I bought clothes I'd never worn before. Flowing sundresses, bohemian jewelry, sandals instead of my usual heels. The kind of outfit that would fit in perfectly with Key West's laid-back yoga community. By afternoon, I'd transformed myself into someone Jim would never expect to see. But physical transformation was only the beginning. I spent the next week studying Layla's routine. She taught classes at Serenity Flow every morning at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. She had lunch with friends at a cafe called Blue Heaven on Wednesdays. She shopped for groceries at the organic market on Saturdays, often joined by Jim, who carried her bags and stole kisses between the produce aisles. Watching them together was torture, but it was also education. I learned that Layla was vegetarian, that she drove a powder blue Vespa, that she volunteered at the local animal shelter on Sunday afternoons. She was everything I wasn't. Free-spirited where I was structured, spontaneous where I was planned, trusting where I had learned to be suspicious. I also learned about their wedding plans. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday at sunset, with a reception at the Ocean House restaurant. Layla had been posting about it constantly on social media, photos of her dress shopping, cake tastings, flower arrangements. Each post was a dagger, but they also gave me crucial information. On Thursday, I made my first move. I signed up for Layla's evening yoga class using the name Sarah Martinez, close enough to my real name that I'd respond naturally, different, enough to avoid immediate recognition. I paid in cash and wore my new persona like armor. Flowing clothes, minimal makeup, the kind of serene expression I'd practiced in my hotel mirror. The class was held in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. Soft music played while Layla guided 15 students through poses I'd hastily learned from online videos. She moved through the room with gentle corrections and encouraging words, every inch the peaceful instructor her students believed her to be. "Remember to breathe into the discomfort," she said as we held a particularly challenging pose. Sometimes the things that challenge us most are exactly what we need to grow. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was definitely breathing into discomfort. And I was certainly growing, just not in the way Layla meant. After class, I approached her as students were rolling up their mats. "Thank you for that beautiful session," I said, my voice slightly breathier than usual. "I'm new to the area and looking for a regular practice." Layla's face lit up with genuine warmth. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Are you visiting or moving here permanently?" "Permanent, I hope. I'm starting over after—" I let my voice trail off, as if the words were too painful to finish. "Well, let's just say I needed a fresh start." Her expression immediately softened, with sympathy. "I understand completely. Key West is perfect for new beginnings. There's something healing about this place." "Your fiancé seems to think so too," I said, nodding toward the window where Jim's Jeep was parked outside. "I've seen you two around town. You make such a beautiful couple." Layla's smile became radiant. "David is amazing. He came here to heal too, after losing his first wife. We found each other when we both needed it most." "How romantic," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "A love story born from tragedy." "Exactly. Sometimes the universe knows what we need better than we do." As I walked away from the studio, Layla's words echoed in my head. The universe knows what we need better than we do. Maybe she was right. Maybe Jim's betrayal had been exactly what I needed to become someone stronger, someone capable of the kind of justice the legal system couldn't provide. That night, I finalized my plan. In 3 days, Layla Voss would marry David Winters in what she believed was a fairy tale wedding. Instead, she was going to get a front row seat to the resurrection of Erica Blackwood. Friday evening, less than 24 hours before the wedding, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. I'd discovered that Jim and Layla were hosting a small rehearsal dinner at their cottage for the wedding party and close friends. Through careful observation, I knew exactly who would be there. Layla's sister Daisy, who'd flown in from Oregon, Jim's business partner Dexter, who'd made the trip from Colorado, and about 8 other people who believed they were celebrating David Winters' second chance at love. I waited until the party was in full swing before making my approach. The cottage glowed with warm light, and I could hear laughter and music, drifting across the water. Through the windows, I watched Jim playing the perfect host, charming Layla's friends with stories I knew by heart. Except now they featured David's fictional past instead of Jim's real one. I'd spent hours perfecting my appearance for this moment. The blonde pixie cut was styled to perfection, and I wore a flowing emerald dress that caught the light beautifully. I looked like someone who belonged in Key West's artistic community. Bohemian, mysterious, and completely unlike the structured businesswoman Jim had married. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the front door and knocked. Layla answered, radiant in a white sundress that made her look like a Greek goddess. Her face was flushed with happiness and probably a glass or two of champagne. "Oh, hello. Are you here for the party?" "Actually, I was hoping to speak with David," I said, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have some information he needs to hear. It's about his late wife." Layla's expression immediately shifted to concern. "His late wife? But there's nothing— David, could you come here for a moment?" I heard his footsteps before I saw him, that familiar, confident stride that had once made my heart race. When Jim appeared in the doorway, wineglass in hand and a welcoming smile on his face, the smile died the instant our eyes met. For a split second, his carefully constructed mask slipped. I saw recognition flash across his features, followed immediately by terror, then desperate calculation. He recovered quickly. Jim had always been good at thinking on his feet, but not quickly enough. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his panic. "I'm David Winters." "No, you're not," I said calmly, loud enough for everyone in the cottage to hear. "You're Jim Blackwood, and I'm your very much alive wife, Erica." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the waves lapping against the shore, the distant sound of music from a neighboring house, the sharp intake of breath from Layla beside me. "That's impossible," Layla whispered, looking between Jim and me. "David's wife died in a hiking accident." He showed me the news articles, the death certificate. "All fabricated," I said, never taking my eyes off Jim's face. "Just like his new identity. Just like your entire relationship. Tell her, Jim. Tell her how you staged your own death to escape our marriage." Jim's facade was crumbling rapidly. The confident businessman was being replaced by something desperate and dangerous. "You're clearly unstable," he said, his voice rising. "David, who is this woman? Should I call the police?" The voice belonged to Dexter, who had appeared behind Jim. His presence sent a shock through me. Dexter, who had comforted me after Jim's disappearance, who had helped me navigate the legal complexities of his death, who had looked me in the eye and lied for months. "Hello, Dexter," I said, my voice like ice. "Still helping Jim steal from grieving widows? Or have you moved on to more sophisticated frauds?" Dexter's face went white. Unlike Jim, he had no talent for deception when cornered. "Erica, we thought you were... How are you here?" "Because unlike my husband, I don't run away when things get difficult," I said. "I find solutions." The party guests had gathered in the doorway now, their celebration forgotten as they watched the drama unfold. Layla stood frozen between us, her fairy tale wedding crumbling in real time. "David, what is she talking about?" Layla asked, her voice small and confused. "The hiking accident, the mourning period, your wedding ring that you wore until we met." "None of that was real?" Jim made one last desperate attempt to salvage his lie. "Layla, sweetheart, this woman is clearly having some kind of breakdown. My name is David Winters. I've never seen her before in my life." That's when I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd been saving for this exact moment. A voicemail Jim had left me 2 years ago, back when he was still pretending to be a loving husband. "Hey babe, it's me. Running late from the client meeting in Panama City. Don't wait up. I'll probably be back Sunday night. Love you." The voice was unmistakably Jim's, but the name on my phone's caller ID, visible to everyone watching, read, "Jim Blackwood, husband." Layla's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Oh my God, this is real. You're really married to him." "Legally, yes," I said gently, though I thought I was a widow until I discovered he was very much alive and planning to commit bigamy. Jim's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand," he snarled, all pretense of being the charming David Winters gone. "Our marriage was over. You were suffocating me with your schedules and your plans and your constant need to control everything. I had to get out." "So, you faked your death and let me grieve?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You let me blame myself for not being able to save you?" "I gave you a clean break," he shouted. "You got the life insurance, the house, everything. Most divorced women don't get nearly as much." The silence that followed his outburst was broken only by Layla's quiet sobbing. She was staring at the man she'd planned to marry in less than 24 hours, as if seeing him for the first time. "The police are already on their way," I said, holding up my phone. "I called them before I knocked. Insurance fraud, identity theft, bigamy. That's going to be quite a list of charges." In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Jim's eyes darted between me, the cottage, and the water beyond, as if calculating whether he could run again. But there was nowhere left to hide. "You destroyed my life," I continued, stepping closer to him. "So now I'm going to return the favor." The sirens were getting closer, but Jim wasn't going down without a fight. His panic transformed into the cold calculation I'd seen him use in business deals gone wrong. He grabbed Layla's hand and pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her waist possessively. "Don't listen to her, Layla," he said, his voice taking on that persuasive tone I knew so well. This woman is clearly mentally unstable. Look at her. She's had plastic surgery to change her appearance. She's been stalking us, watching our home. She's obsessed with the idea that I'm her dead husband. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker in Layla's eyes. Jim had always been a master, manipulator, and even now, caught red-handed, he was trying to rewrite reality. She probably saw David's story in the local paper about starting over after tragedy. He continued, his confidence growing as he saw Layla wavering. Unstable people sometimes fixate on others and create elaborate fantasies. She's built an entire delusion around the idea that David is her husband, Jim. I had to admire his audacity, even as it disgusted me. But I'd prepared for this exact scenario. You're right about one thing, Jim, I said calmly, reaching into my purse. I did have to change my appearance, but not because I'm obsessed with you, because I was in an accident. I pulled out a manila envelope and handed photos to Layla. These are from the hospital in Denver, after I was attacked by men you hired. To silence me when I got too close to the truth about your disappearance. The photos showed me in a hospital bed, my face swollen and bandaged, barely recognizable. Medical records documented the extent of my injuries, and police reports detailed the attack that had nearly killed me. Vincent Keller, I continued, watching Jim's face pale at the name. Your problem solver. The same man you used to intimidate. Your clients when they asked too many questions about their missing investments. He tried to kill me when I started investigating your business dealings. Layla looked at the photos, then at Jim, confusion and horror warring on her face. David, who is Vincent Keller? I've never heard you mention anyone by that name. Because David Winters doesn't know Vincent, I said before Jim could answer. But Jim Blackwood paid him very well over the years. Should I tell them about the B? Rodriguez scandal, Jim. How you helped Senator Rodriguez hide campaign funds in offshore accounts, then had Vincent threaten his family when he wanted out. Jim's carefully constructed facade was crumbling faster now. Each revelation stripped away another layer of David Winters, revealing the corrupt man underneath. Dexter tried to step forward, probably to help craft another lie, but I turned on, him with fury. And you, I said, pointing at Dexter. You looked me in the eye at Jim's memorial service and told me how much he loved me. You helped me file the insurance claims, comforted me through the grief counseling sessions, all while knowing he was alive and planning his new life with another woman. Dexter's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Erica, you have to understand. The business was failing. We had clients threatening lawsuits, regulatory investigations. Jim had to disappear, or we'd all go to prison. So you sacrificed me instead, I said. Made me the grieving widow while you two split the life insurance money and started over. The sirens had stopped, and I could hear car doors slamming outside. Through the window, I saw police officers approaching the cottage, their flashlights, cutting through the darkness. None of this proves anything, Jim said desperately, but his voice lacked conviction. These could all be fabricated, just like you claim my documents were. That's when I played my final card. I pulled out my phone again and opened a video file I'd been saving for this moment. It was security footage from a Cayman Islands bank, showing Jim making a deposit 2 weeks after his supposed death. The timestamp was clearly visible, as was his face when he looked directly at the camera. Explain that, David, I said, turning the phone so everyone could see. Or should I call you by your account name, James Blackwood, deceased? The room fell silent except for the sound of approaching footsteps. Layla was staring at the video, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her situation finally sank in. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years of lies. The romantic dinners where you talked about your late wife. The way you'd get emotional looking at old photos. The anniversary of her death that you said was too painful to discuss. She looked up at Jim with disgust. You used your fake grief to make me fall in love with you. Layla, please, Jim started, but she stepped away from him as if his touch burned. No, she said firmly. Don't touch me. Don't say my name. I don't even know who you are. The police knocked on the door just as Jim made one last desperate attempt to escape. He bolted toward the back of the cottage, pushing past party guests and overturning furniture in his panic. But there was nowhere to run. The cottage was surrounded, and the only exit led to open water. I watched from the doorway as they tackled him on the small dock behind the house. His David Winters persona, finally and completely destroyed. As they handcuffed him, he looked back at the cottage with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over, Erica," he snarled. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. There are people involved in this who will make sure you regret ever coming to Key West." "Threatening a witness in front of police officers," I said calmly. "That's another charge to add to the list." As they led him away, I realized that watching Jim's arrest didn't bring the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt empty, hollowed out by the weight of everything I'd lost and everything I'd had to become to get to this moment. Layla stood beside me, watching the man she'd planned to marry disappear into the night. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," I said, "we both figure out how to rebuild our lives from the ashes of his lies." The aftermath of Jim's arrest was a whirlwind of police interviews, evidence collection, and media attention I hadn't anticipated. Key West's tight-knit community was rocked by the revelation that their beloved David Winters was a fraud who'd abandoned his wife and stolen millions in insurance money. The cottage that had been decorated for a fairy tale wedding became a crime scene, with investigators photographing every room and seizing boxes of documents. Detective Maria Santos, the lead investigator from the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who treated me with a mixture of sympathy and professional skepticism. We sat in the police station's interview room at 2 a.m., fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as she recorded my statement. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, consulting her notes, "you understand that while your husband's actions were clearly fraudulent, some of your methods of investigation could be considered stalking or harassment under Florida law." "I understand," I replied, exhaustion making my voice hoarse. "But I also understand that without those methods, Jim would have successfully committed bigamy and continued stealing from people. Sometimes the law moves too slowly for justice." Detective Santos studied me carefully. "You've been through hell, I can see that. But I need you to understand that this case is going to get complicated quickly. Your husband's business dealings span multiple states and countries. The FBI will want to interview you, the insurance company will launch their own investigation, and there are likely other victims we haven't identified yet." She was right. Over the next 72 hours, I learned just how deep Jim's corruption went. Federal agents arrived from Miami with boxes of evidence showing that Blackwood Financial hadn't just been helping wealthy clients hide assets. They'd been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that had defrauded investors of over $20 million. Jim's fake death hadn't been just about escaping our marriage. It had been about escaping prosecution for financial crimes that could have sent him to prison for decades. "Your husband was planning to disappear anyway," FBI agent Zion Torres explained during one of our interviews. "We've been building a case against Blackwood Financial for 18 months. The SEC investigation, the client complaints, the regulatory pressure. It was all closing in. The hiking accident was his exit strategy." Agent Torres was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of intense focus that suggested he'd been working financial crimes cases for years. He spread photos across the table between us, images of bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, forged documents, and meetings between Jim and known money launderers. "Mrs. Blackwood, I need you to understand something," he continued. "Your husband didn't just steal from insurance companies. He stole from retirees, from families who trusted him with their life savings. There's a 70-year-old woman in Denver who lost her entire pension because she invested with Jim, a young couple in Colorado, Springs who can't afford their daughter's cancer treatments because Jim disappeared with their savings. The weight of Jim's crimes settled on me like a physical burden. All those years of marriage, I'd believed I was living with a successful businessman who helped wealthy clients manage their finances. Instead, I'd been sharing a bed with a predator who destroyed lives for profit. "How many people?" I asked quietly. 43 confirmed victims so far," Agent Torres replied. "Probably more once word gets out that he's been arrested. The total damages could exceed $50 million. The number was staggering. $50 million stolen from people who'd trusted Jim with their futures. And I'd been unknowingly benefiting from those crimes for years, living in a house paid for with stolen money, wearing jewelry bought with other people's life savings, planning a future funded by fraud. "I want to help," I said firmly. "Whatever. You need documents, testimony, access to accounts. I'll provide it all." Agent Torres nodded approvingly. "We were hoping you'd say that. Your cooperation will be crucial in helping us trace the money and potentially recover some of it for the victims. But cooperation came with a price. The federal investigation meant that all of my assets would be frozen while they determined what had been purchased with stolen funds. The Aspen house, the cars, even my personal bank accounts were sealed pending review. I was left with only the cash I'd brought to Key West and the clothes in my suitcase. "Think of it as starting completely over," Agent Torres said, not unkindly. "Clean slate, no baggage from Jim's crimes." Layla had already fled Key West, unable to bear the media attention and the constant reminders of how thoroughly she'd been deceived. Her sister Daisy told me that Layla had returned to Oregon and was considering changing her name to escape the association with the scandal. "She's devastated," Daisy explained when she stopped by my hotel room to return some items Layla had left behind. 2 years of her life were based on complete lies. She's questioning everything about herself, wondering how she could have been so blind. I understood that feeling all too well. The difference was that I'd had months to process Jim's betrayal, while Layla's world had collapsed in a single evening. On my 4th day in Key West, Rodriguez called with news that changed everything. "Mrs. Blackwood," his gravelly voice came, through the phone. "There's something else you need to know about your husband's operation. Something that makes this bigger than just financial fraud." "What do you mean?" "Vincent Keller, the man who attacked you in Denver. He's been found dead in a Miami warehouse. Single gunshot to the head, execution style. Police think it happened the same night your husband was arrested." The phone felt cold in my hand. "You think Jim ordered the hit?" "I think someone wanted to make sure Vincent couldn't testify about who hired him to kill you," Rodriguez said grimly. "And I think that same someone is going to come after anyone else who can connect Jim to his more violent crimes." The implication hit me like ice water. I wasn't just a witness to Jim's financial fraud anymore. I was a target. Someone out there wanted to silence me permanently, and Jim's arrest had only made me more dangerous to them, not less. Rodriguez's warning about Vincent Keller's murder sent me into a spiral of paranoia that made Key West feel like a trap instead of a refuge. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential assassin. Every stranger looked like someone who might be watching me. I moved from my hotel to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash and registering under the name Sarah Martinez. But even with a new identity and location, I couldn't escape the crushing weight of what my life had become. I sat on the edge of a sagging mattress in a room that smelled of mildew and broken dreams, staring at the local news coverage of Jim's arrest. The reporter described me as the vengeful ex-wife who brought down Key West's beloved David Winters, painting me as an obsessed woman who couldn't let go of her dead marriage. The comments on social media were even worse. Layla's friends and the Key West community had rallied around her, portraying her as the innocent victim of my psychotic vendetta. Photos of me at the rehearsal dinner had been shared hundreds of times, with people analyzing my appearance and speculating about my mental state. "She looks unhinged," one comment read. "Poor Layla dodged a bullet. Can you imagine being stalked by your fiancé's crazy ex-wife?" David seemed like such a kind man, another person wrote. This woman clearly destroyed his first marriage and couldn't stand to see him happy again. The irony was suffocating. I'd exposed a criminal who'd stolen millions and destroyed dozens of lives. Yet somehow I was the villain in this story. The truth had been twisted so thoroughly that even I began to question my own actions. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting interviews, federal agents needing additional information, lawyers representing Jim's victims who wanted my cooperation in civil suits. But the call that broke me came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the 70-year-old woman Agent Torres had mentioned. Mrs. Blackwood, she said, her voice frail but determined. I hope you don't mind me calling. Agent Torres gave me your number. I wanted to thank you for exposing what your husband did to us. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, fighting back tears. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm so sorry for what Jim did to you. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, dear, she interrupted gently. You were as much his victim as any of us. But I need you to know something. Because of what you did, because you found the courage to expose him, the FBI recovered some of our money. Not all of it, but enough for me to keep my house. Her words should have brought comfort, but instead they highlighted the devastating scope of Jim's crimes. How many others lost everything? Too many, she admitted. The Hendersons in Colorado Springs. Their little girl won't get the treatment she needs now. The Patels in Denver lost their entire retirement. Jim didn't just steal money, Mrs. Blackwood. He stole futures, dreams, the security people had, worked their whole lives to build. After she hung up, I collapsed onto the motel bed, sobbing for all the lives Jim had destroyed, including my own. I'd thought catching him would bring closure, but instead it had opened a wound that revealed the true extent of his monstrosity. I wasn't just the wife of a man who'd faked his death. I was complicit in a financial empire built on human suffering. The guilt was overwhelming. For 6 years, I'd enjoyed a lifestyle funded by stolen money. The expensive dinners, the designer, clothes, the luxury vacations, all of it paid for with other people's life savings. How could I have been so blind? How could I have never questioned where all the money came from? 3 days after Vincent Keller's murder, Agent Torres called with more devastating news. Mrs. Blackwood, we need to discuss your safety, he said, without preamble. We've uncovered evidence that your husband was working with organized crime figures to launder money through offshore accounts. These aren't people who forgive and forget. What does that mean for me? It means you're a liability. You know too much about Jim's operations, and with Vincent dead, you're one of the few people who can connect him to the money laundering network. We can offer you witness protection, but it would mean disappearing completely. New identity, new location, no contact with anyone from your past. Witness protection. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd been through, after fighting so hard to reclaim my identity, I would have to disappear again. Become someone else, somewhere else, forever looking over my shoulder. I need time to think, I managed. You don't have much time, Agent Torres warned. These people move fast, and they don't take chances. That night, I walked along the deserted beach where Jim and Layla had shared so many romantic moments, my feet sinking into sand that felt like quicksand. The moon reflected off the water, creating a path of light that seemed to lead nowhere. I thought about Mrs. Hartwell, about the cancer patient who wouldn't get treatment, about all the people whose lives Jim had destroyed. I thought about Layla, probably in therapy, trying to understand how she'd been so thoroughly deceived. I thought about my own shattered existence. No home, no money, no future that wasn't shadowed by fear. The weight of it all pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. I'd won the battle against Jim, but I was losing the war for my own life. The victory felt hollow, meaningless, when the cost was becoming someone else entirely. Again. Standing in the darkness, listening to waves crash against the shore, I realized that Jim had won after all. Even from prison, even exposed as a fraud and a criminal, he'd managed to destroy me completely. I was more alone than I'd ever been, more lost than the day I'd discovered his betrayal. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if it would have been better to let sleeping lies lie, to accept the death benefits and move on without ever learning the truth. But as I turned to walk back to my dingy motel room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join Vincent. This is your only warning." The threatening text message changed everything. I stared at my phone screen in the dim light of the motel room, reading the words over and over until they burned into my memory. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was a direct threat from people who'd already killed Vincent Keller to protect their secrets. I was about to call Agent Torres when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Bree's name, and I realized I hadn't spoken to my best friend since that first night in Key West when I'd hung up on her warnings about revenge. "Erica, thank God," she said when I answered. "I've been following the news coverage. Are you okay?" The sound of her familiar voice broke something inside me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone with the weight of everything that had happened. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm not okay. Nothing is okay." "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." "Bree, you can't. It's too dangerous." "There are people who—" "I know about the threats," she interrupted. "Agent Torres called me yesterday. He thought you might reach out to someone from your past, and he wanted to make sure I knew about the risks." I felt a flash of anger. "So, you know they're watching me. You know that anyone who helps me becomes a target." "I know that my best friend is in trouble, and I'm not going to abandon her," Bree said firmly. "I'm already in Florida. I flew in this morning and I'm driving down to Key West now." The relief was overwhelming. After days of isolation and fear, someone I trusted was coming to help. But the practical side of my mind kicked in immediately. "Bree, this isn't just about Jim anymore. There are organized crime connections, money laundering networks. The FBI thinks you need witness protection," she finished. "Agent Torres briefed me on everything. But before you disappear, forever, there's something you need to know." "What do you mean?" "I've been doing my own investigation into Jim's associates. You remember Marcus Webb, the lawyer who handled your adoption paperwork when you were 4? I did remember him, a family friend who'd helped Nicholas with legal matters over the years." "What about him?" "He's been working with the FBI for the past 6 months, providing information about financial crimes in Colorado, and he wants to meet with you before you enter witness protection." Something in Bree's tone made me suspicious. "Why? What could he possibly have to tell me now?" "Information about your biological parents' death. Marcus says he has evidence that Nicholas wasn't involved in their accident, but someone else was. Someone who's connected to Jim's current troubles." The revelation hit me like electricity. For months, I'd believed that Nicholas had murdered my parents to cover up financial crimes. It had been one of the driving forces behind my need for justice. The reason I'd felt justified in destroying his life along with Jim's. "That's impossible," I said. "The private investigator had documents, evidence that pointed to Nicholas, but was actually planted by someone else," Bree explained. "Marcus has been investigating irregularities in old case files, and your parents' accident was one of them. He thinks someone used their death to frame Nicholas for crimes he didn't commit." My mind raced through the implications. If Nicholas hadn't killed my parents, then my understanding of everything was wrong. The corrupt businessman I'd hated for years might have been innocent of the one crime that mattered most to me. "Bree, this doesn't make sense. Why would someone frame Nicholas? And what does this have to do with Jim's criminal network?" "That's what Marcus wants to explain in person. He's flying down from Denver tomorrow morning. But Erica, there's something else. Agent Torres doesn't know about this meeting. Marcus requested that we keep it between us until he can present his evidence officially." The paranoia that had been my constant companion for days flared up again. So we're keeping secrets from the FBI now? That seems like a terrible idea. Marcus thinks there might be corruption in the investigation, someone feeding information to the wrong people. He wants to make sure his evidence reaches the right hands. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of too many secrets, too many lies, too many people I couldn't trust. Where do you want to meet? There's a small cafe in Islamorada, about an hour north of Key West. Neutral territory, public place, easy to spot if anyone's following us. Can you make it there tomorrow at noon? I looked around the shabby motel room that had become my hiding place. The threatening text message was still glowing on my phone screen, a reminder that staying in one place too long wasn't safe anyway. I'll be there, I said. But Bree, if this goes wrong, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, she said with the certainty of someone who'd been making split-second life-or-death decisions for years. You've survived everything Jim and his associates have thrown at you so far. We're going to figure this out together. After she hung up, I sat in the darkness thinking about the possibility that everything I'd believed about my parents' death was wrong. If Nicholas hadn't killed them, then who had? And why would someone want me to think he was responsible? The threatening text seemed to mock me from my phone screen. Stop digging or join Vincent. But maybe digging deeper was the only way to uncover the truth that would finally set me free. I started packing my few belongings, preparing for another departure, another attempt to stay one step ahead of people who wanted me dead. But for the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. And hope, I was learning, could be more dangerous than fear. The drive to Islamorada felt like traveling through a minefield. Every car that followed too closely, every motorcycle that passed too slowly, sent my heart racing. I'd left the motel at dawn, taking back roads and making random stops to ensure I wasn't being followed. The threatening text had made it clear that someone was watching my movements, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me now. The cafe Bree had chosen was perfect for a clandestine meeting, a small family-owned restaurant called Sunset Grill, tucked between a tackle shop and a souvenir store, with clear sightlines to the parking lot and multiple exit routes. The weathered building looked like it had survived decades of hurricanes, its faded paint and salt-stained windows telling stories of resilience against impossible odds. I arrived 30 minutes early and positioned myself at a corner table where I could watch the entrance. The lunch crowd was sparse, a few local fishermen discussing weather patterns, an elderly couple sharing key lime pie, and a woman reading a paperback novel while her toddler colored with crayons. Normal people living normal lives, blissfully, unaware that they were sharing space with someone marked for death. Bree arrived precisely at noon, her detective instincts evident in how she scanned the restaurant before sitting down. She looked tired, stress lines etched around her eyes that hadn't been there during our college days. Following my descent into this nightmare had clearly taken a toll on her as well. 5 minutes later, a man I recognized from old family photos entered the restaurant. Marcus Webb looked older than I remembered, his hair now completely gray and his face lined with the kind of stress that comes from carrying dangerous secrets for decades. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the nervous energy radiating from his movements. "Erica," he said, sliding into the booth across from me, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry it's taken so long to reach you. I had to be absolutely certain it was safe to make contact." "Safe from whom?" I asked, studying his face for signs of deception. "Bree said you have information about my parents' death, but I don't. Understand why that matters now, 20 years later." Marcus opened a leather briefcase with hands that trembled slightly, pulling out a thick folder marked with official-looking seals. "Because your parents' accident wasn't random, and it wasn't orchestrated by Nicholas Carson. It was arranged by the same criminal organization that your husband got involved with years later." He spread out photographs and documents on the table, Between us, his movements careful and deliberate. The images showed my father in a laboratory setting, working with equipment I didn't recognize. Other photos depicted meetings between men in expensive suits, taken with telephoto lenses from considerable distances. Your father, James, was working on breakthrough cardiac medication at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, Marcus explained, his voice gaining strength as he fell into the rhythm of his revelation. But he'd also stumbled onto something else, a money laundering operation running through the company's research divisions. Millions of dollars from drug trafficking were being cleaned through fake clinical trials and inflated research budgets. I stared at the documents, my mind struggling to process this new version of events. Everything I'd believed about my parents' death was being systematically dismantled. But the private investigator showed me evidence that Nicholas was involved. Bank records, communication logs. Planted evidence, Marcus said grimly, pulling out another set of documents. The same people who killed your parents needed a scapegoat in case anyone got too close to the truth. Nicholas was perfect, wealthy, connected, with enough questionable business dealings to make the frame-up believable to anyone who didn't look too closely. Bree leaned forward, her detective instincts engaged. Marcus, how do you know all this? What's your connection to the case? The question I'd been afraid to ask hung in the air between us. Marcus's expression crumbled, years of guilt and regret washing over his features like a tide. Because I was the one who helped plant the evidence, he admitted, his voice heavy with self-loathing. 20 years ago, I was young, ambitious, and deeply in debt. My law practice was failing, my marriage was falling apart, and I had creditors threatening to destroy everything I'd worked for. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, another trusted figure revealed as complicit in the web of lies that had shaped my entire understanding of my past. You let me believe Nicholas killed my parents for 20 years. I've regretted it every day since, Marcus said, tears forming in his eyes. But I was trapped. They made it clear that if I ever talked, I'd end up like your parents. They showed me crime scene photos, told me exactly how they'd arranged the accident. I was a coward, Erica. I chose my own survival over the truth. He pulled out another set of documents, his hand steadier now that the confession was out. It wasn't until Jim's arrest that I realized the same organization was still operating, still destroying lives. That's when I decided I had to come forward, regardless of the consequences. The documents revealed a pharmaceutical company called Meridian Pharmaceuticals as a front for laundering drug money. Financial records showed millions flowing through fake research projects, with my father's legitimate cardiac research being used as cover for massive criminal operations. When Jim started his financial services business, Marcus continued, they recruited him to modernize their operations. Everything he did, the offshore accounts, the identity changes, even faking his own death, he learned from them. The techniques had been perfected over decades of helping criminals disappear. So Jim's crimes aren't separate from my parents' murder, I said slowly, the full scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. They're part of the same organization. Exactly. And that's why they want you dead, Erica. You're not just a witness to Jim's fraud anymore. You're the daughter of the people who tried to expose them 20 years ago. In their minds, you represent unfinished business, a loose thread that could unravel everything they've built. Marcus's revelation about the 20-year conspiracy was still sinking in when Bree's phone erupted with an urgent series of text messages. The color drained from her face as she read them, her detective training immediately recognizing the gravity of whatever information was flooding her screen. We need to leave, now, she said, her voice tight with controlled panic as she grabbed her purse and stood abruptly. Agent Torres just sent an emergency alert. There's been chatter about a hit team heading to the Keys. They know exactly where you are. My blood turned to ice as the implications hit me. How could they know? I've been careful. I've switched motels. Your phone, Marcus said grimly, his face pale with realization. "They've been tracking your location through cell towers since you arrived in Florida. Every call, every text, every time you've turned it on, they've been building a pattern of your movements." I was already moving toward the exit, adrenaline flooding my system, when the first gunshot shattered the cafe's front window in an explosion of glass and screams. The peaceful lunch crowd erupted in chaos as diners dove for cover behind overturned tables. Through the spider-webbed remains of the window, I could see two men in dark tactical clothing approaching the restaurant with assault rifles held at the ready, their movements coordinated and professional. "Back exit now!" Bree shouted, her detective training taking over as she drew her service weapon. Though I knew her pistol would be little match for military-grade firearms, seeing her armed gave me a fragment of hope in the chaos. "Stay low and move." We crawled toward the kitchen on hands and knees as bullets splintered the wood around us, sending fragments of tables and chairs flying through the air. The elderly couple I'd noticed earlier were huddled behind the counter, the woman shielding, her husband with her body while he pressed his hands over his ears. Their terror was a stark reminder that innocent people were in danger because of my presence. The cafe's cook, a middle-aged Cuban man with flour-dusted hands, pointed toward a rear door that led to a narrow alley. "Por ahí, through there," he shouted in accented English, his face a mask of determination despite the gunfire. "I keep them busy, you go." Marcus stumbled as we reached the kitchen door, crying out in pain as blood began spreading across his expensive shirt from a wound in his shoulder. A bullet had found its mark despite our desperate attempt to stay low. "Go without me," he gasped, his face gray with shock and blood loss. "I'm slowing you down, and you can't afford—" "Like hell," I said, grabbing one of his arms while Bree took the other. "You don't get to confess to 20 years of lies and then die before explaining everything. We're all getting out of this alive." We burst through the back door into the sun-baked alley behind the restaurant, the Florida heat hitting us like a wall after the air-conditioned cafe. Bree's rental car was parked 50 yards away, but I could already see that the gunmen had anticipated our escape route. Dark figures were moving to flank the building, their tactical gear and precise movements suggesting military or intelligence training. "The marina," Bree said urgently, pointing toward the boat docks visible at the end of the alley where masts swayed against the blue sky. "If we can reach the water, we might have a chance. They can't follow us in a boat." Another gunshot rang. Out, this one so close I felt the bullet whistle past my ear. Close enough that I could feel the heat of its passage. One of the assassins had found the back door, and he was young, cold-eyed, and moving with the kind of lethal precision that suggested extensive military training. His weapon was raised and aimed directly at us. I thought of Vincent Keller, executed, in a Miami warehouse for the crime of failing to kill me the first time. I thought of my parents, murdered for discovering the truth about a pharmaceutical company's criminal activities 22 years ago. The same organization that had been operating for decades, destroying anyone who threatened their operations, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. But something had fundamentally changed in me during these months of running and fighting and discovering the depths of betrayal that had shaped my life. I wasn't the naive wife who'd believed her husband's lies about business trips anymore. I wasn't the grieving daughter who'd accepted easy answers about her parents' death without question. I was someone who'd learned to fight back, someone who'd discovered that survival sometimes required becoming harder than your enemies. "Give me your backup weapon," I told Bree, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. "Erica, you're not trained for combat situations." "I'm trained for survival," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "And I'm done running from these people. Someone needs to make a stand." The boat docks were our only realistic chance of escape, but getting there meant crossing 30 yards of open ground while armed killers hunted us like prey. As Marcus slumped against a rust-stained dumpster, his breathing becoming increasingly labored and his face growing paler by the minute, I realized with crystal clarity that not all of us were going to make it out of this alley alive. The gunman was getting closer, his footsteps measured and confident. Soon, he'd have a clear shot at all three of us, and this deadly game would be over. It was time to make a choice about who I was willing to become to stay alive, and what I was prepared to do to protect the people who'd risked everything to help me find the truth. The gunman rounded the corner of the dumpster just as Bree tossed me her backup pistol, a compact Glock that felt surprisingly heavy in my hands. I'd never fired a weapon in my life, but desperation has a way of teaching you things you never thought you'd need to know. My hands were steady as I aimed at the metal dumpster beside the assassin and pulled the trigger, the recoil traveling up my arms like an electric shock. The bullet ricocheted off metal with a sharp, ringing clang that echoed through the alley, causing the gunman to dive for cover behind a pile of restaurant supply boxes. The sound bought us precious seconds, but I could hear him already coordinating with his partner over radio devices, their voices calm and professional despite the chaos they'd unleashed. "Run!" Bree shouted, laying down covering fire as we half-carried, half-dragged Marcus toward the marina. Her shots were precise and well-placed, keeping the assassins pinned down while we made our desperate escape. Behind us, I could hear the gunmen regrouping, their tactical training evident in how quickly they adapted to our resistance. We reached the boat docks as sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police about the shooting, though I wondered if help would arrive in time or if the organization's corrupt contacts would delay the response. The marina was a maze of moored vessels, from million-dollar sport fishing boats to working shrimp trawlers that had seen decades of hard use. The air smelled of salt, diesel fuel, and fish, a potent cocktail that spoke of honest work and simpler lives. Bree spotted a sleek cigarette boat with its keys still dangling from the ignition, apparently abandoned by an owner who'd fled when the shooting started. "Grand Theft Auto is the least of our problems right now," she said grimly, helping me load Marcus onto the vessel's white leather seats. His face was gray with blood loss, but his eyes were still alert and focused. The boat's twin engines roared, to life with a sound like controlled thunder just as the first assassin appeared on the dock, his assault rifle raised and tracking our movement. Bullets splashed into the water around us, sending up geysers of spray as Bree gunned the throttle, sending us rocketing away from shore with enough acceleration to throw me backward against the seats. As we sped through the crystalline waters of the Florida Keys, Marcus struggled to sit up, clutching a waterproof document case to his chest like a lifeline. The case was clearly something he'd prepared in advance, insurance against exactly this kind of situation. "Erica," he gasped, his voice weak but determined. "There's something else you need to know. The conspiracy, it goes higher than you think. Much higher." "Save your strength," I said, pressing my hand against his shoulder wound to slow the bleeding, but he shook his head with surprising vigor. "No, you have to understand before—" He paused, struggling for breath. "Agent Torres. He's been feeding information to them. That's how they found us so quickly at the cafe. The FBI task force investigating Jim's crimes. It's compromised at the highest levels." Bree's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she processed this information. "That's impossible. Torres has been working this case for months, building evidence, building a file to bury," Marcus corrected, his lawyer's precision cutting through even his physical distress. "He's been working for them, not against them. They have people everywhere, police departments, FBI field offices, DEA task forces, even federal prosecutors. It's how they've stayed hidden and operational for 20 years. The implications hit me like a cold wave washing over our speeding boat. If Torres was corrupt, then everything the FBI had told me was potentially false. The witness protection program they'd offered might have been a trap designed to isolate me completely. The evidence they'd collected could be sanitized, buried, or destroyed at will. So what do we do? I asked, watching the Florida coastline recede behind us. If we can't trust law enforcement, if they have people embedded in every agency that's supposed to protect the public, we disappear, Marcus said, opening the waterproof document case with hands that shook from blood loss. Inside were new identities, passports, driver's licenses, Social security cards, birth certificates, all the documentation needed to become completely different people. I've been preparing for this day for years, waiting for the courage to finally expose them. He handed me a passport with my photo, but bearing the name Elena Rodriguez, complete with entry and exit stamps that created a plausible travel history. The craftsmanship was impeccable, clearly the work of professionals who specialized in creating undetectable false identities. "There's a contact in the Bahamas," Marcus continued, his voice growing weaker but his message urgent. "Someone who helps people escape from situations exactly like this. Her name is Isabel Santos. She's not part of any government agency, and she has no love for the organization that killed your parents." He pulled out a waterproof phone and showed me a contact entry. "Isabel operates outside all official channels. She's former intelligence, but she went freelance after her own agency betrayed her. She understands what it's like to discover that the people you trusted are the ones trying to destroy you." As our stolen boat raced across the dark blue waters toward an uncertain future, cutting through waves that sparkled in the afternoon sun, I realized that this was my true rebirth moment. Not the plastic surgery in Key West, not the confrontation with Jim that had started this whole nightmare, but this desperate flight across international waters toward a new identity that might finally allow me to fight back effectively. The woman who had been Erica Martinez Blackwood was dying in the spray and wind of our escape, her naive trust in institutions and legal processes dissolving like salt in the ocean air. Someone harder, more dangerous, and infinitely more capable was being born in her place. Someone who understood that justice sometimes requires working completely outside the system that's supposed to provide it. Nassau's harbor appeared through the morning mist like a mirage after our harrowing 12-hour journey across the Gulf Stream. The crossing had been a nightmare of navigation by stars, dodging Coast Guard patrols, and trying to keep Marcus conscious as he fought blood loss and shock. I'd used my shirt to create a makeshift pressure bandage for his shoulder wound while Bree navigated by GPS and marine charts she'd found in the boat's cabin. The stolen cigarette boat was running on fumes when we finally spotted the lights of Paradise Island, but we'd made it to Bahamian waters where American law enforcement couldn't follow without creating an international incident. The morning sun painted the colonial buildings of Nassau in shades of pink and gold, a deceptively peaceful scene that belied the violence we'd fled. The contact Marcus had mentioned was a woman named Isabel Santos, who operated what appeared to be a legitimate shipping and logistics business from a weathered warehouse on the eastern side of Nassau Harbor. She met us at a private dock hidden among the commercial fishing boats, her sun-weathered face showing no surprise at our bedraggled appearance or Marcus's obvious injuries. "Elena Rodriguez?" she asked, using the name from my new passport, her voice carrying the trace of an accent I couldn't quite place. "That's me now," I replied, still getting used to the sound of it rolling off my tongue. The name felt foreign but somehow liberating, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. Isabel nodded approvingly, her keen eyes taking in every detail of our appearance and condition. "Good. Elena Rodriguez has a much better chance of survival than Erica Blackwood. Names have power, and yours was becoming too dangerous to carry. Let's get Marcus to a doctor first, then we'll discuss your transformation." For 2 weeks, we lived in a safe house above Isabel's warehouse, a Spartanly furnished but secure apartment with reinforced windows and multiple escape routes. The building hummed with the constant activity of legitimate shipping operations, below providing perfect cover for less legal activities. While Marcus recovered under the care of a discreet Bahamian doctor who asked no questions, my new identity began to take shape through careful planning and methodical preparation. The physical changes were subtle but effective. Darker hair that transformed my entire appearance, different contact lenses that changed my eye color from blue to brown, and carefully applied makeup techniques that altered the apparent shape of my face and bone structure. But the real transformation was psychological, a fundamental rewiring of how I saw myself and the world around me. Isabel was former CIA, though she never discussed the specific circumstances that led to her exile in Nassau. Her past was written in scars and cautious habits, in the way she checked windows before speaking and never sat with her back to a door. She taught me things no civilian should ever need to know: how to spot surveillance teams in crowds, how to disappear in plain sight, how to read people's intentions from their body language, and most chillingly, how to kill someone quickly and quietly if necessary. The weapons training was intensive and frightening. I went from never having fired a gun to being able to hit targets accurately at 50 yards, from flinching at loud noises to field-stripping pistols by touch in complete darkness. Isabel was a demanding instructor who pushed me far beyond what I thought were my limits. "You're not just hiding from these people," she explained during one of our sessions on a remote beach where the sound of gunfire would be masked by crashing waves. "You're preparing to hunt them. There's a fundamental difference between prey and predator, and it shows in how you carry yourself, how you move through the world." She was right. I could feel myself changing day by day, becoming harder and more calculating. The woman who'd once agonized over confronting Jim about suspicious phone calls was learning to think 3 moves ahead in a deadly game of international chess. I was developing instincts I'd never known I possessed, a heightened awareness of danger that made me catalog exit routes and potential weapons in every room I entered. Bree struggled with my transformation more than I did. She watched me practice combat techniques and study surveillance methods with growing concern. "This isn't you, Erica," she said one evening as we watched the sunset from the warehouse roof, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples. "You're becoming someone I don't recognize." "Good," I replied, my voice steadier and colder than it had been in months. "The person you knew was too trusting, too naive. She believed in fairness and justice through proper channels. She thought the system would protect her if she played by the rules. Look where that got me. It got you here, alive, when you should be dead," Bree pointed out, her detective's pragmatism cutting through my cynicism. "That counts for something." But I was beyond caring about moral victories. Marcus had been working with Isabel to plan our next move, using encrypted communications and offshore intelligence networks to map the organization that had destroyed my family. They'd identified key players, operational patterns, and most importantly, weaknesses that could be exploited. The criminal network that killed my parents and corrupted Jim had cells operating throughout the Caribbean, using pharmaceutical companies and financial services as fronts for massive money laundering operations. But they also had a critical vulnerability. Their operations required face-to-face meetings, high-level gatherings where decisions were made and power was distributed among the hierarchy. "There's a summit in 3 months," Marcus told us during one of our strategy sessions. His shoulder finally healed enough for him to work at a computer for extended periods. He was consulting encrypted communications that Isabel had intercepted through her network of former intelligence operatives. "Grand Cayman. All the major players will be there, including the man who ordered your parents' death." I studied the eye. Surveillance photos spread across the table. Middle-aged men in expensive suits who looked like successful businessmen rather than international criminals. One face stood out from the rest, distinguished, silver-haired, with cold eyes that seemed familiar from somewhere deep in my memory. "Who is he?" I asked, pointing to the photo with a finger that no longer trembled when discussing violence. Marcus's expression darkened with old hatred. "Dr. Richard Thorne. He ran Meridian Pharmaceuticals where your father worked. He's been orchestrating this entire conspiracy for 30 years, building an empire on the graves of people like your parents." Elena Rodriguez smiled for the first time since her birth, a cold expression that would have terrified Erica Blackwood. Finally, I had a target worthy of everything I'd become. 3 months of intensive preparation transformed Elena Rodriguez into someone Erica Blackwood could never have imagined becoming. The luxury resort in Grand Cayman where Dr. Thorne's summit would take place required the kind of sophisticated infiltration that demanded months of planning, extensive intelligence gathering, and a level of calculated ruthlessness I was still learning to embrace fully. Isabel had cultivated connections throughout the Caribbean's shadow economy over decades of off-the-books operations, forgers who could create undetectable documents, hackers who could penetrate any computer system, and mercenaries who operated beyond the reach of any government. Through this network, we learned that the summit wasn't just another business meeting. It was Dr. Thorne's retirement celebration and succession ceremony. After 30 years of running the organization with an iron fist, he was passing operational control to his hand-picked protege and planning to disappear to a heavily fortified compound in the mountains of Colombia. "This is your only realistic chance," Isabel warned me during one of our strategy sessions in her secure conference room. Surrounded by maps, photographs, and electronic surveillance equipment, once Thorne retires and disappears, he'll be completely untouchable. He'll have multiple layers of private security, an array of false identities, and financial resources we can't hope to match. The plan we developed was audacious in its apparent simplicity but fiendishly complex in its execution. I would infiltrate the summit as a high-end escort hired to entertain the participants, a role that would give me unprecedented access to the resort's most secure areas while providing a logical explanation for my presence at closed-door meetings. The organization's leadership had a well-documented reputation for indulging in such luxuries during their gatherings, viewing expensive companions as both status symbols and stress relief. Bree struggled profoundly with the moral implications of what we were planning. "You're talking about premeditated murder, Erica. Cold-blooded assassination. This isn't justice. It's revenge." "I'm talking about the only kind of justice these people understand," I corrected, though even as I said the words, I wondered if I could still tell the difference between the two concepts. These people killed my parents in cold blood, destroyed dozens of innocent lives, and corrupted entire law enforcement agencies to protect themselves. How many more people have to die while we wait for a legal system that's been systematically bought and paid for? The transformation required to become Elena Rodriguez, sophisticated international escort, was as thorough and demanding as any previous incarnation. Expensive designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, professional makeup techniques that could withstand close scrutiny, and most importantly, the kind of confident, worldly sensuality that would make powerful men underestimate my intelligence while overestimating their own charm. I spent weeks practicing walking in designer heels that cost thousands of dollars, speaking with a subtle European accent that suggested expensive international education, and most critically, appearing completely harmless and decorative while carrying concealed weapons capable of killing efficiently and silently. The persona had to be flawless. These men had survived for decades by being paranoid, suspicious, and thoroughly prepared for any threat. Marcus, now fully recovered and burning with his own desire for redemption, worked closely with Isabel's team of hackers to access the resort's security systems and guest databases. They created a complete digital backstory for Elena Rodriguez, including satisfied client testimonials on exclusive escort websites, financial records that would pass professional scrutiny, and a social media presence that painted the picture of a sophisticated woman who moved in the highest circles of international society. Every detail had to be absolutely perfect. The organization we were targeting had survived and thrived for 3 decades by being methodical, thorough, and utterly ruthless in eliminating threats. A single inconsistency in my cover story could result in death not just for me, but for everyone who had helped me reach this point. The weapons Isabel provided were masterpieces of deadly engineering. Ceramic components that wouldn't trigger even the most sensitive metal detectors, disguised as everyday objects that would blend seamlessly into an escort's expensive accessories. A lipstick tube that concealed a small but lethally sharp ceramic blade, jewelry with components that could be quickly assembled into a functional firearm, and most elegantly, a perfume atomizer filled with an untraceable neurotoxin that Isabel had acquired through her intelligence contacts in Eastern Europe. Remember, Isabel said during our final briefing, her weathered face serious in the harsh fluorescent light of the warehouse's planning room. You only get one chance at Thorn. The moment you make your move, regardless of how subtle you think, your being, the entire resort will transform into a war zone. You'll have minutes at most to eliminate your target and reach the extraction point before they lock down the entire island. The night before I was scheduled to fly to Grand Cayman, Bree pulled me aside for what we both knew might be our final conversation. "Promise me something," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Promise me that when this is over, when you've gotten your justice or revenge or whatever you want to call it, you won't disappear forever into this world of shadows and violence." She gestured toward the warehouse around us, where lethal professionals planned operations that would never appear in any official records. The world needs people who fight for what's right, but it also needs people who remember why the fight matters, who can find their way back to something resembling normal humanity. Looking at my reflection in the mirror that night, Elena, Rodriguez's dark hair and brown eyes staring back at me with cold determination, I wondered if I could keep any such promise. The person I'd become was effective, dangerous, and utterly committed to destroying those who'd destroyed my family. But I wasn't sure she was someone who could ever find peace, or if peace was even something worth wanting anymore. The Ritz-Carlton. Grand Cayman was a fortress of luxury, hiding the most dangerous criminals in the Western Hemisphere. I arrived on a Friday afternoon aboard a private jet that Isabel had arranged, my credentials as Elena Rodriguez passing through multiple layers of security checks without raising the slightest suspicion. The organization's summit was being conducted under the elaborate cover of an international pharmaceutical industry conference, complete with legitimate attendees who had no idea they were providing camouflage for the real business happening in private suites and secluded beach pavilions. The resort itself was breathtaking, white sand beaches that seemed to glow in the Caribbean sun, infinity pools that blended seamlessly with the turquoise horizon, and architecture that whispered of understated wealth and absolute privacy. But beneath the tropical paradise facade, I could sense the undercurrents of danger. Security personnel in expensive suits moved through the grounds with the predatory grace of apex predators, their eyes constantly scanning for threats that might never materialize. Dr. Richard Thorn was exactly as I'd expected from months of studying surveillance photos. Distinguished, effortlessly charming, and radiating the kind of absolute confidence that came from 30 years of orchestrating murders and getting away with it. At 72, he remained remarkably vital, his silver hair perfectly styled and his custom-tailored suits fitting his lean frame like a second skin. He was holding court in the resort's presidential suite, surrounded by the men who'd helped him build his empire of corruption over 3 decades. Watching him laugh at cocktail party jokes, seeing him shake hands with pharmaceutical executives who had no idea they were mingling with a mass murderer, made my blood burn with carefully controlled fury. This was the man who'd ordered my parents' execution, who'd destroyed countless lives in pursuit of profit, who'd corrupted institutions designed to protect innocent people. The escort cover worked with disturbing perfection. These powerful men saw Elena Rodriguez exactly as I'd intended, as expensive arm candy, a beautiful distraction who posed absolutely no threat to their carefully guarded secrets. They discussed business openly in my presence, treating me like a piece of attractive furniture that happened to be breathing and occasionally refilling their drinks. "The transition is proceeding more smoothly than we anticipated," Thorn told his successor during a private gathering in his suite, a cold-eyed man named Harrison Vale who radiated the same casual brutality I'd learned to recognize in career criminals. "The pharmaceutical operations in Southeast Asia are already completely under your control, and the Caribbean laundering network will follow within the next month." I smiled vapidly and refilled their crystal tumblers with 30-year-old scotch that cost more than most people's cars, committing every word to memory while maintaining the perfect facade of bored sophistication. The scope of their operation was staggering: drug manufacturing facilities disguised as legitimate pharmaceutical research centers, money laundering networks spanning dozens of shell companies across multiple continents, and a web of corrupt officials that reached into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came on Saturday night during Thorne's retirement celebration. The resort's private beach had been completely reserved for the organization's leadership, with discreet security positioned at strategic intervals to ensure absolute privacy from prying eyes or surveillance equipment. Thorne, emboldened by expensive champagne and the company of young women who hung on his every word, was more relaxed and talkative than I'd seen him all weekend. "You know," he said, when I approached with a fresh bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than most people earned in a month, "you remind me of someone from long ago. There was a woman researcher many years back, very beautiful, very naive. She thought she could expose our operations and somehow emerge unscathed." My hand tightened involuntarily on the champagne bottle, but Elena Rodriguez just smiled seductively, her training overriding every instinct for immediate violence. "Really? What happened to her?" "Car accident," Thorne said with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather rather than cold-blooded murder. "She and her husband. Very tragic, really. They left behind a young daughter, but these things happen when people interfere with serious business interests. The confirmation of my parents' murder from their killer's own lips was almost more than I could bear without breaking character. Every fiber of my being screamed for immediate vengeance, but Elena Rodriguez had been trained for exactly this moment of supreme self-control. "How terrible," I purred, moving closer with practiced sensuality. "You must carry such heavy burdens of responsibility." "The burden of leadership," he agreed philosophically, his manicured hand finding my waist with the casual entitlement of a man accustomed to taking whatever he wanted. "Perhaps you'd like to help me forget about business for the evening?" The private bungalow he led me to was absolutely perfect for my purposes. Completely isolated from the main resort, soundproofed for privacy, and with direct ocean access that would facilitate a quick escape. Thorne poured himself another generous measure of cognac while I pretended to freshen up in the marble bathroom, my hands steady as I assembled the ceramic components of my concealed weapon with the muscle memory Isabel had drilled into me over months of intensive training. When I emerged from the bathroom, Thorne was standing on the moonlit balcony overlooking the Caribbean, completely vulnerable and blissfully unaware that his 30-year reign of terror was about to end forever. The ocean breeze carried the scent of tropical flowers and salt air, a deceptively peaceful backdrop for what was about to unfold. "Dr. Thorne?" I said, my voice dropping its carefully maintained sultry pretense for the first time in 3 days. "I have something important to tell you about James and Elizabeth Reed." He turned slowly, confusion flickering across his weathered features as he heard my parents' names spoken in a context he couldn't immediately place. Recognition dawned gradually in his cold eyes as I raised the weapon, understanding flooding his face just moments too late to matter. "You killed the wrong daughter," I said with absolute calm, and pulled the trigger. The sound was barely a whisper in the tropical night, but Dr. Richard Thorne's empire of corruption died with him on that moonlit balcony, 22 years after. He'd murdered my parents for the crime of trying to expose the truth. The escape from Grand Cayman was a masterpiece of timing and preparation. I slipped from Thorne's bungalow into the ocean, where Isabel waited with a speedboat just beyond the reef. By the time Thorne's body was discovered the next morning, Elena Rodriguez had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. The organization fractured without its leader. Harrison Vale tried to maintain control, but 30 years of absolute authority under Thorne had left the network unprepared for succession. Internal power struggles erupted across multiple countries as different factions fought for dominance. The pharmaceutical fronts collapsed under scrutiny from newly honest investigators, and the money laundering operations withered as their protectors in law enforcement found themselves under investigation. Jim's trial became a media sensation once the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. With Thorne dead and the organization in chaos, surviving members raced to cut deals with prosecutors. Agent Torres was arrested for corruption, his carefully constructed career destroyed by evidence Marcus had preserved for decades. Jim, facing life in prison without the protection of his criminal network, finally told the truth about everything. His fake death, the insurance fraud, and his desperate attempt to escape consequences that had been building for years. I watched. The coverage from a small cafe in Costa Rica, where Elena Rodriguez was slowly transforming into someone new. The dark hair was growing out, revealing streaks of my natural brown. The contact lenses were gone, letting my blue eyes see the world clearly again. But the woman looking back from mirror reflections wasn't Erica Blackwood either. She was someone forged from betrayal, tempered by loss, and strengthened by the knowledge that justice sometimes requires stepping outside the law. Bree found me 6 months later, tracking me through a network of contacts that impressed even Isabel. She arrived in San Jose wearing her detective badge and a worried expression. "You can't hide forever," she said when she sat down across from me at the same cafe where I'd been having breakfast for weeks. "The FBI wants to debrief you. There are victims who need closure, and there are people who care about you." "Which people?" I asked. "Erica Blackwood is legally dead. Elena Rodriguez never existed. I'm not sure who I am anymore." "You're my best friend," Bree said simply. "You're the woman who exposed a conspiracy that had operated for 30 years. You're someone who fought back when the system failed. That's enough identity for anyone." The offer she brought was unexpected. A position with an international task force investigating corporate crime, using my unique experience to help others who'd been betrayed by people they trusted. It wasn't witness protection or hiding. It was a chance to turn my transformation into something positive. "You'd be working outside normal channels," Bree explained. "Independent contractors, accountable to oversight committees but not bound by bureaucratic limitations. People like Thorne, like Jim, they count on the system being slow and predictable. You could be the wild card they never see coming." I thought about Mrs. Hartwell, who'd lost her life savings to Jim's scheme. About my parents, who'd died trying to expose corruption. About all the victims who never got justice because the system was designed to protect the powerful. 2 years ago, my husband staged his own death to escape our marriage. Tonight, at what should have been his secret wedding to another woman, I'd made his fake death real by destroying the identity he'd built on lies. But looking at Bree across that cafe table, I realized my story wasn't ending with revenge. It was beginning with purpose. The woman who walked out of that cafe wasn't Erica or Elena. She was someone entirely new. Someone who understood that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to work around it entirely. And she was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.